Welcome to our deep dive, all about somatic psychotherapy. You sent in some excerpts from the Somatic Psychotherapy Toolbox, this book by Manuela Mishka-Reeds.
Hmm?
And honestly, I'm already so intrigued. Like over 120 techniques for therapists to bring body awareness into their practice.
Wow.
I know, right?
Mm.
It's a lot to unpack. Thankfully, I've got an expert in somatic psychology right here with us.
Happy to be here.
Now, this book, it really dives into how connected the mind and body are. It makes you wonder why we see them as so separate?
Yeah,
It's like we forget our bodies are full of wisdom.
it's true. And the book, it even calls modern society a disembodied culture. Like we just ignore what our body's telling us.
Right,
And well, ignoring those signals, it can really impact how well we feel overall.
for sure. Before we get too deep into things, what got you interested in this? Like, what are you hoping to get out of this deep dive?
Honestly, I'm curious how these techniques can help us connect our emotional and physical experiences, especially when it comes to trauma or like that constant chronic stress.
Absolutely. So, for anyone listening who might be new to this, could you give us a quick rundown? What is somatic psychotherapy? What's the main idea behind it?
Well, at its core, it's about realizing that the body and the mind, they're one thing.
Okay.
They're not separate. So it's understanding that like physical stuff, our emotions and thoughts, they're all affecting each other.
Hmm.
Instead of just talking about problems, we actually bring the body into the therapy, literally.
It makes a lot of sense. And the book says this isn't just for the client. Therapists need this awareness, too, to be really effective.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that saying, physician, heal thyself, right?
Yeah, exactly. The author, she emphasizes that therapists need to be aware of their own bodies, their own feelings.
Hmm.
It's about creating a safe space for both people.
Okay, now for the fun part, the techniques. This book, it's overflowing with them, over 120. Mindfulness, breath work, even safe touch. Anything jump out at you?
Honestly, they're all super interesting, but the one that caught my eye immediately was this shaking it off.
Mm.
Sounds so simple,
Mm.
but the book says shaking can actually help your nervous system reset. Like, it's how our bodies naturally release that pent-up energy.
That's wild. There's also this technique called back body awareness that seems to be more for the therapist.
That's right, yeah. It's all about noticing what's happening in your own back, particularly before you go into a tough session.
Oh, interesting.
Helps the therapist ground themselves, be more present, create a more solid container for their client.
So it's like getting into the right headspace, but for your body.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, befriending the body. This one really got me curious.
Hmm.
Sounds kind of poetic, but what does it actually mean in therapy?
It's about being kind to your body, even when it's feeling things that aren't so pleasant. Just noticing what's there without judging it. The book gives you steps for it. Softening, letting go, and just noticing.
Noticing without judgment. That seems to come up a lot in somatic psychotherapy.
Oh, for sure. It's all about allowing those feelings to just be, not trying to change them.
Okay, gotta ask. Left-right body split. When I read that, I was like, wait, what? Can you explain this one? Why is this split important, and what does a therapist actually do with it?
So it's pretty interesting. Basically, it's when someone feels different sensations or even emotions on each side of their body.
Oh, wow.
It can be a huge clue for the therapist. Like it might point to emotional patterns or things in the past that haven't been dealt with. It's not about making the sides match up, but understanding what each one is trying to say.
So, like, each side of the body tells part of the story, and listening to both gives you the full picture.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. And we can't forget the best named technique, lunar breath.
All right.
It sounds so mystical. Can you demystify it for us? How do you use it, and what's it supposed to do?
It's this very gentle way of breathing. It focuses on a smooth in and out rhythm, like the phases of the moon.
I like that.
It's amazing for calming the nervous system, especially if you're dealing with anxiety or trauma.
And speaking of things that need a little more explanation, the book mentions safe touch.
Right.
Obviously, this can be a sensitive topic, so I appreciate the book's focus on ethics and, like, the legal side of things. Can you give us some context? How is safe touch used in therapy, and what are the potential benefits?
It's so important to understand that safe touch in therapy is never sexual.
Right, of course.
It's about using touch, but in a way that's mindful and intentional.
Yeah.
It can help clients feel calmer, set boundaries, and even help them work through trauma. There are even techniques for self-touch in the book. It's all about reclaiming touch as something healing and empowering.
Yeah, I think it's so important to change how we think about touch and realize it can help us heal.
Definitely. It's about expanding our understanding of what touch can be, especially within a therapeutic relationship.
It feels like we've just dipped our toes into this somatic psychotherapy toolbox.
Yeah, we have.
But what I'm seeing is that it's not just about a bunch of techniques. It's
Uh-huh.
a whole new way of thinking about therapy.
You're absolutely right. It's a whole shift in perspective. The body is a source of wisdom and healing. We need to go beyond just talking in therapy.
Right, bring in the body. And that brings us to this idea from the book, The Window of Tolerance.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means and how does it connect to stress and trauma?
Okay, so think of your ability to handle stress like a window.
Okay.
When we're inside that window, we can deal with challenges without getting overwhelmed or shutting down.
Got it.
But if something happens outside that window, too much stress or even too little stimulation, our nervous system can go haywire.
Oh, wow.
This can lead to anxiety, panic attacks, or even freezing up completely.
The book actually has a diagram for this window of tolerance. It shows how we can swing to this hyperarousal where we're anxious and overwhelmed, or hypoarousal where we feel numb and disconnected.
Exactly. The goal of somatic psychotherapy is to help people expand that window,
Hmm.
to handle more stuff without getting thrown off balance.
It's like building resilience, but from the inside out, getting our nervous system ready for anything.
That's a great way to put it.
We've covered a lot, but before we move on, I want to talk about shame. The book spends a lot of time on it, how it shows up in our bodies. What are your thoughts on how the author approaches shame from the somatic angle?
I think it's brilliant. The author, she encourages therapists to be kind and curious about shame. It's a normal human emotion.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to pretend it's not there, somatic psychotherapy helps us explore it safely.
And I love that idea from the book, The Shame Monster.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor that helps us take that shame outside of ourselves, make it less scary and easier to handle.
Right. It's powerful because it lets people separate themselves from the shame, see it as something separate from who they truly are.
So we've talked about the mind-body connection, looked at some fascinating techniques, and even touched on the window of tolerance and how complex shame is. What are your main takeaways so far? What's sticking with you?
What really strikes me is how holistic this approach is. It's not just about fixing symptoms. It's about getting to the root of our struggles and giving us the power to heal on a deeper level.
I totally agree. And with all these techniques, it shows how adaptable and creative this approach can be.
Right.
It's about finding what works for each person,
Mm.
respecting their individual journey.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for healing, and that's what makes this so powerful.
I'm already excited to dive into the next part of our exploration, but before we do, what stands out to you? What's got you curious?
I'm interested in seeing how these techniques work in the real world.
Yeah.
Like, how do therapists use them with their clients? What kind of impact do they have?
Great questions.
Yeah.
And I think those are the perfect lead-in to the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore more of the, nuances and how we can use somatic psychotherapy in everyday life.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. We'll be back soon to continue this journey.
Looking forward to it. What's really interesting about somatic psychotherapy, it's not just about fixing problems or healing old wounds. It's about, like, becoming more capable of joy, connection, creativity, all that.
That's a really cool way to look at it. I like how the book doesn't just dwell on what's wrong.
Right.
It actually highlights how powerful it is to be in touch with your body, like how it can make us feel more alive, more connected to the world around us.
It's about realizing our bodies aren't just, holding pain or trauma. They're full of resilience, strength, even joy.
And speaking of connection, the book talks about how embodiment is key to empathy.
Oh, yeah.
It's about actually feeling for others, connecting on a deeper level.
That makes total sense. If we're not even connected to our own bodies, our own feelings, how can we really understand what others are going through?
So let's go back to that toolbox for a minute. Over 120 techniques.
A lot, right?
It's hard to wrap your head around. Is there like a common thread that runs through them all, or are they done in a specific order?
While they are super diverse, I'd say they all emphasize mindfulness.
Okay.
Pretty much every technique encourages you to pay attention to what's going on inside. Sensations, emotions, all of it. And there's no set order. It's more about using the right tool for the job. You know what I mean?
So it's more like a toolbox than a recipe book.
Exactly. You got to be adaptable, respond to what's happening in the moment.
Okay, walk me through this. How does a therapist actually choose which technique to use?
Well, the book is organized by themes like mindfulness, body awareness, movement, breath work, touch, and working with trauma.
Okay.
The therapist picks techniques based on what the client needs, what they're trying to achieve in that session.
I'm starting to see how personalized this approach can be.
That's a big part of what makes somatic psychotherapy so powerful. It respects that each person's experience is unique.
Can you give me some examples? I'm having a little trouble picturing how these techniques would actually play out in a session.
Sure. So imagine you have a client who's dealing with a lot of anxiety. The therapist might use the learner breath technique to help them calm down their nervous system.
Got it.
Or if a client is carrying a ton of tension, the shaking it off technique could be a really powerful way to release that energy.
But what about something like befriending the body? How does that actually work in practice?
Oh, it's beautiful. It encourages the client to turn their attention inward and just explore their physical sensations with kindness and curiosity, not judgment.
Right.
So the therapist might guide them to notice their breath or how their feet feel on the floor. It's about building a more loving relationship with their body.
Some of these techniques sound like things people might already do in their daily life.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of them are inspired by ancient practices like yoga and meditation. But what somatic psychotherapy does is give us a framework for understanding how these practices affect our nervous system and our overall well-being.
So it's like taking those practices and applying them in a therapeutic setting with a deeper understanding of how they work.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're intrigued. How would they go about finding a qualified somatic psychotherapist?
That's a great question. The best place to start is probably by checking with your insurance to see if they cover it.
Okay.
You can also look at online directories like the U.S. Association for Body Psychotherapy or the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association.
Got it.
They list practitioners all over the place.
Word of mouth can be helpful too.
Well,
You might be surprised who you know that's had experience with somatic psychotherapy.
it's becoming more and more popular. People are really starting to see how important that mind-body connection is.
Now, something that really resonated with me in the book was this idea of the therapist being a somatic guide. It's not enough for them to just know the techniques right. They have to embody them too.
That's absolutely crucial. The therapist's own presence, their own groundedness, it creates the space for the client to heal.
Yeah.
And that presence can only come from a deep connection to their own body, their own sensations, their own emotions.
So it's about being a living example of what it means to be embodied.
Exactly. The therapist becomes a co-explorer with the client, helping them navigate their own inner world.
And speaking of challenging terrain, I know the book has a whole section on working with trauma. Why is that such a big focus in somatic psychotherapy?
Well, because trauma often gets trapped in the body. It can show up as physical symptoms, chronic pain, even emotional ups and downs. Talk therapy, while super helpful, might not be enough to deal with those deep-rooted patterns. Somatic psychotherapy helps us access and process those traumatic experiences on a deeper level by working directly with the body's sensations and responses.
It's like finally giving the body a chance to let go of what it's been holding on to for so long.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the book has all sorts of techniques for doing that. Shaking, movement exercises, breathing techniques, mindfulness practices.
And all of those techniques are geared towards helping people regulate their nervous systems, which is essential for trauma recovery.
Absolutely. When we can regulate our nervous systems, we can escape those states of hyperarousal or hypoarousal.
Yeah.
We can create a sense of safety and stability in our own bodies.
We talked about shame earlier, and I think it's worth bringing up again, especially when it comes to trauma.
Oh, for sure.
Shame is often a huge part of the trauma experience, isn't it?
Absolutely. People who have experienced trauma often blame themselves or feel like they're broken somehow.
And that shame can make people feel so alone. It makes it hard to ask for help.
Exactly. That's why how the author approaches shame is so important. It's about recognizing that shame is normal. It's a human response to difficult things. It's about helping people build a more compassionate relationship with themselves.
It's about reclaiming their power, realizing they're not defined by their trauma or their shame.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the core ideas of somatic psychotherapy, looked at the techniques, and talked about the importance of addressing trauma and shame. What are your key takeaways? What do you hope our listener walks away with?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that our bodies are incredibly wise, and they hold so much potential for healing. Somatic psychotherapy offers a way to tap into that wisdom, to reconnect with our bodies and use that connection to create more fulfilling lives.
Yeah.
It's about realizing we're not just our thoughts. We're whole beings with a physical presence that deserves our attention and care.
Beautifully said. I think another key takeaway is that somatic psychotherapy isn't just about fixing problems or treating symptoms.
Right.
It's also about becoming more joyful, more connected, experiencing the world in a richer way.
It's about embracing everything that makes us who we are.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a thought from the book. The body is our most important place for healing and transformation. What's one small step you can take today to listen to your body's wisdom?
It could be as simple as just noticing your breath throughout the day, feeling yourself breathe in and out,
Hmm.
or maybe taking a few minutes to stretch, to move your body. Those little things can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and they can open us up to a whole new way of relating to ourselves.
It's an invitation to reconnect with our bodies, to
Hmm.
discover all the wisdom they hold.
We've been talking about all these amazing ideas from the Somatic Psychotherapy Toolbox, and this deep dive has been, well, eye-opening for me. The power of the body in therapy is incredible.
Yeah, it is. And it's fascinating how this book brings together ancient wisdom, like old traditions and modern science.
Mm.
People have known about the mind-body connection for ages. But now, with neuroscience and research,
Yeah.
we're actually starting to understand how it works, the biology behind it.
It's like science is finally catching up to what people knew all along. The book mentions something called polyvagal theory.
hmm
Sounds pretty complex. Can you explain that? Like in simple terms, even I can understand.
Okay, so basically it's about how our nervous system is constantly checking out our surroundings,
Okay.
looking for signs of safety or danger. And this system, the vagus nerve especially, it's super important for controlling how we react, both emotionally and physically.
So it's like our nervous system is our own personal bodyguard, always watching out for threats. But how does that relate to therapy?
Well, if someone's gone through trauma, their nervous system can get stuck in this on-guard mode,
Mm.
like it's always on high alert. And that can cause anxiety, constant stress, even physical problems. Somatic psychotherapy helps us retrain our nervous system.
Oh, interesting.
It teaches us how to spot those signs of safety and danger and react in a more balanced way.
So we're like giving our nervous system a software update. I have to admit something. When I first heard about somatic psychotherapy, I thought it was all about massage or physical therapy.
Oh, I see.
But this book shows it's way deeper than that.
It really is. It's about realizing the body holds so much information, wisdom, healing.
Yeah.
It's understanding that our experiences, our emotions, our beliefs, they're all stored in our bodies. And then we can use these techniques to access and process all that stuff in a way that actually changes us for the better.
One of the things that really hit home for me in the book was how much emphasis is put on the therapist's own embodiment.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just enough for them to know these techniques intellectually, right?
Exactly.
They have to live them too.
Right. The therapist's presence, their own groundedness, is what allows the client to feel safe enough to heal.
Makes sense.
And that can only come if the therapist is deeply connected to their own body, their own sensations, their own emotions.
So it's like the therapist is a fellow traveler, not just someone observing from the outside.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the good stuff, the benefits, but are there any downsides to somatic psychotherapy or things to be cautious about?
Well, like any type of therapy, it's not a quick fix.
Okay.
It can bring up strong emotions and memories,
I see.
and it takes a willingness to, approach your body in a different way.
Yeah.
It's also super important to find a therapist who's qualified, has experience, and someone you feel safe and comfortable with.
Yeah, that's crucial. So as we wrap up this deep dive into somatic psychotherapy, what's one last thing you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Healing is possible. Our bodies are amazing. They're not just containers for pain or trauma. They're full of resilience, strength, and joy. Somatic psychotherapy helps us tap into that potential. It helps us build a life that's more in line with what we truly want, our deepest values and desires.
That's beautifully said. Honestly, I'm feeling inspired to start paying more attention to my own body's wisdom.
It's a journey worth taking. Even little things like noticing your breath or being mindful of your posture can make a big difference.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this exploration of the somatic psychotherapy toolbox.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been truly eye-opening. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you've learned something valuable about the world of somatic psychotherapy. Maybe you've even found a new path to healing and wholeness. Until next time, be kind to your body, listen to what it's telling you, and embrace the incredible power of embodiment.